Over in China, the country has invested in Arctic shipping and mineral extraction to diversify trade routes and secure resources as its geopolitical rivalry with the West heats up. Is Beijing's security interest on a direct collision course with the U.S. in the Arctic? Our China reporter, Elaine, is taking a deeper dive. So, I've been saying that it really boils down to the U.S. and China. Is it really the case?
Right, and we should take a step back at China's polar strategy as well. So Trump threatened to annex Greenland, saying that Chinese and Russian ships are all over the island. But let's take a closer look at the actual state of China's Arctic investments. So China's Arctic engagements began decades ago, but the blueprint became official in 2018 when Beijing released its first Arctic policy white paper, where it famously declared itself a near-Arctic state. And for the first time in 2021, the building of a polar Silk Road and, quote, pragmatic cooperation on the Arctic was written directly onto China's 14th five-year plan. And Beijing set its goals back in 2018 on the white paper were to understand, protect, develop, and participate in the governance of the Arctic. But of course, behind the diplomatic language is a hard-nosed search for diversification when it comes to trade, especially, and also its economic security. So at the heart of this is the Northern Sea Route. It's a 6,000-kilometer corridor along Russia's coastline. And for China, that's a massive shortcut. And that vision became reality in October 2025 when the first vessel named the Istanbul Bridge on China's and the Europe Arctic Express route has sailed from eastern China to eastern England in just 20 days, carrying lithium-ion batteries and solar products, which shipping officials say this route is particularly well suited for heat-sensitive and time-critical cargo. Now, China has hailed this as a win for the planet, saying that shorter trips mean significantly lower carbon emissions, and it compared this 20-day journey to roughly 40 days that would have taken if it went through the Suez Canal. But this environmentally, these claims are also a double-edged sword because the Clean Arctic Alliance has warned that intensive shipping in that area could bring noise pollutions, which could disrupt marine life whose navigation and communication depend on sound, and also increased traffic in that region could mean more greenhouse gas emissions, including super pollutants that would accelerate the climate change that is already melting the ice. And there are other physical limitations as well. This is only a seasonal trade corridor operating roughly around July to October, and there are also high operational costs, right? These cargo container ships, usually they're designed for open oceans, and to navigate these icy waters, you need those reinforced with special structures like hulls, reinforced hulls, and so forth. So it is a lot of upfront investment. But for China, they see this as a long-term investment too, since global trade depends on several choke points, the Suez Canal, the Malacca Strait, and for China, that means diversifying these routes, especially as trade tensions increase, and also more economic security and less reliance on those areas that are under U.S. influence.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the merit in all this, but we need to sort of make a distinction between narrative that China is pushing for and, whatever it said in 2018 in their white paper and reality. So a lot of China's Arctic investments are in Russia rather than the Nordic states as well as Greenland. Many of them actually failed or they're stalling. I mean, I understand the difficulties in operations as well, but tell us more about that.
Yeah, so China has poured billions into the Russian Arctic. There's the natural gas project, the Yamal LNG, where Chinese companies have minority stakes, and also the Arctic LNG 2, where China has a 20% stake, but U.S. sanctions actually stalled progress. So even Western pressure can shape investments around Russia. And in 2024 as well, China sent 3 icebreakers to the Arctic, which analysts say is where China and Russia are seeking more cooperation on shipping routes. But beyond Russia, that's where the story really changes. There are various infrastructure investments like bridge in Norway and research facilities in the Nordic that have some of them, and including research stations, have stalled due to concerns appears related to dual use purposes and other security concerns. And in Greenland, this is where the gap between narrative and reality seem the widest. And a study in 2025 in June from Harvard's Belfer Center said that in Greenland, actually 7 out of 8 proposed investments have stalled or never materialized. And there's a well-known example of a state affiliated company in China, Shanghai Resources, acquiring a stake in a rare earth and uranium project in southern Greenland in 2016, but it halted after Greenland reinstated a ban on uranium mining in 2021. And Chinese companies have engaged with the Greenland in the 2010s. And this is something that has, the seeds have been planted years ago, but has run up to all these troubles and in other Nordic states. And, China's polar strategy is about early access to this region, but they're still facing, a lot of challenges ahead.
And of course, the idea is that the more Russia works with China in the Arctic, the more legitimacy perhaps that China gets in the region. And I think that is the idea that perhaps the U.S. is pushing back against. But stick around for this next conversation. We've got Frederic Lasserre. He is the director of the Quebec Council for Geopolitical Studies, joining us live this morning. Frederic, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. So just an update for our viewers as well as, the Dream Team and obviously, Frederic, for you. We've got President Trump speaking on the Air Force One. That's what I'm hearing. And he's saying Greenland should make the deal. We're talking about acquiring, not having short term, and then the line gets cut off. But you get the idea that he is reiterating the Greenland project or desire once again. You point out in your notes that Greenland project, this is not new. There have been several attempts. Is it different because it's 2026?
What is different this time, as you mentioned, there have been several attempts in the past by the United States to lure Denmark into selling Greenland in 1868, in 1917, in 1946. What is different now is that the United States are really pushing hard on Denmark to agree to sell Greenland, whereas Denmark or Greenland absolutely do not want to agree to that deal. What is really worrying is to the extent to which the United States are going to push forward for this for a purchase. The United States have threatened with tariffs, have threatened to use force to reach their goals, and this is really worrisome to the extent that we do not know what Trump is up for.
Yeah, and I recall months ago, a Greenland minister said that if Western investments don't ramp up in Greenland, then they'll be forced to turn to other sources, perhaps including Chinese investments. But now with the geopolitical discussion and Trump's threat being so aggressive, do you think that will actually make Chinese investments appear more appealing for Greenland? What do you think?
Greenland has always been opened for business. They repeatedly said that they were willing to do business, whereas for extracting natural resources or for any infrastructure deal, they were willing to do business with whomever wanted to do business with them. So they were open to do business with American firms. They were open to do business with European firms as well as Chinese companies. And there were a few ventures, you mentioned it, several ventures in the natural resources extraction field. Most of them failed. For instance, there was the Isua iron field that was owned by the Chinese company General Ice that experienced a lot of difficulties and lack of profitability. So that lured the Greenlandic autonomous government to revoke the license. You mentioned the Cranfield rare earth and uranium field that was blocked by a change in the Greenlandic law. But there were also attempts by the government to sign contracts for the renovation of several airports in Greenland. So that was a proof that the Greenlandic government was really eager to do business with Chinese companies, but that was blocked by the Danish government under pressure from the United States several years ago. So it's not that the Greenlandic government does not want to do business with Chinese companies. On the contrary, it's really willing to do so. But there have been several pressures from Washington to not for the Greenlandic government to go ahead with doing business with Chinese companies for fear that China would get too much influence over the Greenlandic government.
So what are Chinese governments and companies' prospects in the Arctic then? There are some Chinese investors we've heard that have become more cautious when it comes to Greenland and the Nordic states because of these geopolitical uncertainties. And most investments, it seems, are still centered around the Russian Arctic. So do you think it's in China's interest to keep pushing on the Nordic or sort of reinforce its footprint in Russia?
Definitely, it sends the bad message for Chinese companies to the extent that if they want to do business ventures in Greenland or in the Nordic states, it's likely that it's not going to please the American government. Washington has been very clear with Denmark that it doesn't want Chinese businesses to be too much involved in Greenland. It's just a bit the same in Nordic countries. There are a few Chinese mining ventures in Canada operating and being profitable. But recently there was an attempt to purchase a gold mine by a Chinese company that was blocked by the Canadian federal government. So it's as if because of the interest that China developed with regards to the Pole Silk Road and the Arctic in general, there's a much reluctance by Nordic countries as well as Canada and the United States to let China develop too many business ventures in the Arctic.
And I was reading about how most of Russia's nuclear capability is based there. And what kind of, would that be a factor that plays into the dynamic and the Trump administration's thinking right now?
It's very difficult to see why there are fears for national security. We know that, of course, there are nuclear missiles in Russia. This is precisely the objective of the Pitufik, the American base in Greenland. It's part of the network of radars that were designed and set up to prevent, to warn ahead of time should there be an attack from Russian nuclear missiles. We know that, you mentioned it a few minutes ago, there are no Chinese naval or Russian naval ships around Greenland. There have been maneuvers in the Bering Sea a few years ago between China and Russia, but not in the vicinity of Greenland. So there is no obvious military threat, whether from China or from Russia, around Greenland. This is not the case. So we are a bit lost to what the Trump administration was thinking about. What is for sure, however, is that there's been a redeployment of the Russian nuclear subs in the North Atlantic, and they no longer need to go across the gap, the gap between Iceland, the UK, and Greenland to threaten the link between the United States and Europe should there be a third world war. So this kind of uncertainty to the extent to what the nuclear subs could disrupt logistical supplies between the United States and in Europe in case of a war could also underline the need for the United States to foster military cooperation with Denmark and Greenland. But this can be done within the present treaty that was signed in 1951 that was renewed in 2004. So that enables the United States to develop other military bases in Greenland if it wants. So it's very unclear to what extent there are real military security threats towards the United States in the present day.
I'm just going to go for a very far-fetched sounding idea, and you can laugh at the idea or tell me where I'm wrong, but I'm going to try to marry the Venezuela angle and Greenland angle in all this. So when President Trump is talking about how we're going to work with Venezuela people, we're going to basically selling Venezuelan oil is a positive for the economy there, for the lives of the people there. Could that same model work in Greenland somehow?
They're trying. There's part of the argument that should Greenland become part of the United States, then the United States could develop natural resources in Greenland, and that will be to the benefit of the people in Greenland. This argument seems really a bit far-fetched, as you mentioned, because, as I said, Greenland has been open for business for the past 15 years, and no American company was really willing to go into Greenland and develop natural resources. So it's not because Greenland should become part of the United States that it's going to be more attractive for American companies to operate in Greenland, because they're really reasoning in terms of profitability and not in terms of whether Greenland is part of the United States or not. So trying to lure to attract the Greenlandic people into becoming Americans because President Trump says we're going to help you develop the resources and you're going to be richer. It seems to be far-fetched, really far-fetched.
Fred, good evening your side. This is Martin. Let me quickly jump in with a question. I apologize for the background noise. I'm down at a UBS conference right now. But look, what I want to ask you, Fred, is, Chinese activity in Greenland seems to have slowed noticeably. Airport contracts have been canceled. Chinese mining ventures, they don't seem to be making much headway at all. How much of that is political, I want to ask you? Is Greenland and maybe Denmark agreeing with the U.S. or the West to try and check China? And how much of this, especially on the mining and exploration side, is due to technology? The technology or the innovation is simply not there yet to extract successfully from Greenland.
Very good question. I think that for the airport contracts, these were really canceled because of American pressure on the Danish government that in turn pressured the Greenlandic government into canceling these contracts. There was a real fear that they would give too much influence for these Chinese companies onto the Greenlandic government. As far as natural extraction is concerned, it really depends. For instance, the Fine Field rare earth and uranium project was cancelled by the Greenlandic government, not because it was a Chinese and Australian venture. It was really cancelled because of the fear that if uranium was extracted along with the rare earth, there would be threats to concerns with the environment. So it's really because of the environment and the fear that it will pollute the environment that the Greenlandic government decided to cancel this project. As far as the Isuian field is concerned, it's really because the Chinese firm, the General Nice, couldn't find a way to develop the project profitably, and so it was revoked by the Greenlandic government because the project was going nowhere. So you see, there are issues with profitability because it's very hard to develop profitable ventures in Greenland because of the Arctic harsh conditions. And there are also concerns with domestic politics, as far as, for instance, uranium is concerned. And there are also for the contract infrastructure development. These really were the object of political pressures by the American government onto Danish and Greenlandic governments.
And really going back to the basics, I mean, when President Trump says we're going to acquire Greenland, whether they like it or not, the U.S. already has its air base, some sort of a permanent presence there. And I think Denmark, well, as far as we know, having been a good ally to the United States, so they can work something out. They even have a defense agreement signed back in the 50s as well. So why do you think he is choosing this particular route, especially in the year of midterm elections?
This is a very good question. As I mentioned, it's very difficult to understand the military security concerns that were evoked by the Trump administration. It's very difficult to understand why the United States now feel threatened by the Greenlandic situation. One hypothesis we may formulate is that they fear not a real threat for the present time, is that they fear what an independent Greenlandic government could decide when it becomes independent. It's not for the short term, but for the medium to longer term. All political parties but one in Greenland agree that their goal is to reach independence. The 2009 agreement between Denmark and Greenland frames the route towards independence. So when Greenland becomes independent in the more or less medium term, it raises the question, what is this government going, what is this new state going to develop as far as defense treaties, for instance, with the United States is concerned? So I guess Washington is a bit afraid that the Greenlandic independent state might not decide to renew this treaty, which is not warranted because several parties in Greenland said we do want to maintain a close cooperation as far as military cooperation is concerned with the United States. We don't want to opt out of NATO. We don't want to be a non-aligned state, but we just want to have a say in military issues right now. And when we're independent, we want to maintain close ties with the United States. So even from that point of view, what would the an independent Greenlandic government decide? There's no real need to be that much afraid from the American point of view, because Greenland repeatedly said that it would want to maintain a close relationship with the United States.
Frederic, it's great to have you on. Great insights. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us today. That was